The hall was not built for human beings. I knew that the moment I walked in. Ceiling stretched 40 m above my head, carved from a single piece of dark Kareth stone that hummed faintly with the vibration of the station's gravity. Systems, the seats around the curved assembly floor were shaped for bodies twice my size with limbs that bent at angles no human spine could manage. The lighting was set to a frequency that made the edges of everything look slightly wrong, like a photograph taken with the wrong lens. It was not an accident. Nothing in this room was an accident. I walked to the podium anyway. My name is Yeldoran. In 2247, I was the United Earth Envoy to the Galactic Conclave, a body of 47 civilizations so old that some of them had been traveling between stars before humans had learned to write. I had held the position for 3 years. In those 3 years I had been spoken over, spoken around, and occasionally spoken about as though I were not standing directly in front of the speaker. I had learned to treat all of it as information. Today was different. Today I had evidence. I placed my data slate on the podium and pulled up the first file. Holographic projection bloomed above me. A map of the outer conclave frontier, where the Anari system sat quiet and small among a cluster of stars that nobody powerful cared about. Red markers dotted the map, 17 of them. Each one represented a territorial boundary marker that had been moved, removed, or simply destroyed over the past 14 months. Each one was in the same direction. All of them pointed toward the Veth. The Veth were not present in the chamber. They never attended sessions directly. Instead, a single Veth head observer occupied a sealed glass enclosure on the far right of the assembly floor, a crystalline structure, roughly the shape of a human torso, containing shifting geometric patterns of light that served as its face. It had no eyes as far as anyone could tell. It watched everything anyway. I began speaking. Distinguished members of the conclave, I said. My voice was calm. I had practiced being calm for this exact moment because I had known for a long time that nobody in this room would respond well to human who showed emotion. Emotion to the elder races was evidence of immaturity. I am presenting, for the 3rd time in 8 months, documented evidence of Veth territorial incursion into Anari designated space. This evidence includes sensor logs, boundary station records, and testimony from 4 Anari outpost personnel who observed Veth crystalline growth structures and advancing across the Anari moon designated ORS-7. I am formally requesting that the conclave open an investigative proceeding. I stopped speaking. The hall was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Then the Durath senior delegate, a creature that looked from a distance like a pile of dark fabric with too many fingers, leaned toward its communication node and made a sound that the translation system rendered as a polite dismissive clearing of the throat. The envoy's concerns are noted, said the translation. That was it. That was the response. I did not move from the podium. With respect, I said I would ask the assembly to note that I submitted a similar filing 8 months ago and again 4 months ago. Both filings were tabled in the period since the first filing. The Veth boundary advance has accelerated by 31%. I have the projection data if the assembly would like to see it. The Durath delegates' fabric layers shifted in a way that the translation system could not process, but that I had learned to read as mild irritation. Beside it, the Mahin representative, a tall, pale silver organism that breathed through openings along its neck, turned slightly away from me, the chorus collective occupying 3 adjacent seats with their linked mind forms, did not move at all. They never moved during human presentations. I had stopped taking it personally after the first year. The envoy has been heard, said the Durath delegate. The Anari have been filing the same warnings for 2 years. I said I kept my voice level. I would ask the assembly to confirm whether those filings were reviewed. A pause longer. This time, the conclave processes all formal submissions in accordance with established procedure. I understand. My question was whether they were reviewed. Another pause. The Veth observers' internal light patterns shifted briefly, then settled. Something about that small movement made the back of my neck feel cold. The Mahin representative spoke for the first time in its native frequency, a sound like wind through long pipe, which the translation system converted with a slight delay. Earth's membership in the conclave spans 11 years. The procedures of this body span 11,000. We would counsel patients trust in those procedures. Patients trust in procedures. I looked at the red markers on the map above me. 17 boundary violations. One small civilization being eaten alive slowly in a corner of the galaxy that nobody powerful wanted to look at, and the oldest, most powerful interstellar body in known space was asking me to be patient. I saved the data. I closed the projection. I picked up my slate. The envoy thanks the assembly for its time. I said because those were the words I was supposed to say, and I said them in the correct tone with the correct pause before stepping back from the podium. I had learned very early that the way to be heard in this room was to never give them a reason to dismiss you on form. Be correct, be precise, never raise your voice, never let them see the thing that was moving fast and hot in the center of your chest. I walked back to the human delegation's small cluster of seats near the outer edge of the floor. My aide, a young man named Colin Price, leaned toward me as I sat. He had been with me for 2 years. He was 26 years old and still believed, with a kind of stubborn warmth, that the conclave could be reasoned with. They tabled it again, he said very quietly. They did not even table it, I said. They noted it. Colin was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What is the difference? Tabling it implies they intend to return to it." I said, "Noting it means they wrote it down somewhere and moved on." He absorbed that. On the assembly floor, the Durath delegate had already moved to the next item of business, a resource allocation dispute between 2 elder race systems that would probably take 3 sessions to resolve. The hall had shifted its collective attention completely away from me, as smoothly and completely as water closing over a stone. I was already pulling up a secure channel on my slate. I had been to the Anunnaki diplomatic quarters the previous evening, which was something I had started doing every time I came to Carrot Station. Sella was the last Anunnaki representative currently stationed here, a small, quiet person with large amber eyes and a stillness about her that I had initially mistaken for resignation and later understood was something else entirely. It was the stillness of someone who had already processed their grief and come out the other side into pure, clear purpose. She had shown me the Latest reports from OR7 over a shared meal that neither of us had eaten much of. The VETH crystalline growth structures had advanced another 11 km. Since my last visit, they grew slowly. The structures, slowly enough that you could almost tell yourself they weren't moving at all if you only checked once a month. They looked in the sensor imagery like frost spreading across a window, beautiful, a distant and terrible way, and wherever they spread, the land underneath went quiet, not destroyed exactly, absorbed, changed into something that was no longer itself. 2 years, Sela had said very quietly, looking at the imagery. We have been filing reports for 2 years. I know, I said. My government sent the first warning before I was posted here. They updated it every 3 months with new data. They used every correct procedure, every proper channel. She paused. Do you know what the conclave said to the very first filing? I shook my head. They said the Anunnaki's concerns were noted. She said that was in 2245. We sat with that for a moment. Will they do anything? She asked. She did not ask it with hope. She asked it the way you ask a question when you already know the answer and you are simply checking to see whether the other person will tell you the truth. No, I said, not through procedure, not in time. She nodded very slowly. Then what happens? I thought about what to say. I thought about the encrypted conversations I had been having with Sol Command for the past 18 months. I thought about Admiral Curran Ness, who I had met exactly twice in person and spoken to many times over secure channels, and who had a way of listening that made you feel like every word you said was being stored somewhere useful. I thought about the questions Ness had started asking 6 months ago that were no longer questions about whether something needed to happen, but questions about when something will happen. I said to Sela, I cannot tell you more than that right now, but I want you to know someone has been listening. She studied my face for a long moment. Then she nodded once and looked back at the imagery of her moon being slowly covered in crystal, and did not say anything else. Sitting in C Assembly Hall now, watching the Durath delegate discuss mineral rights on the other side of the galaxy, I composed the message I had been preparing for 3 years, short, specific, encrypted, addressed to Admiral Curran Ness at Sol Command, marked priority 1. The message read, they will not move, they will not ever move, we will have sent it. Then I put my slate on my knee, folded my hands on top of it, and sat very still, watching the elder races of the galaxy conduct their ancient business in their enormous hall under their strange light with their 11,000 years of procedure, and I let myself think about what was already moving in the dark behind Jupiter, where no one had thought to look. The VETH observers' light pattern shifted again briefly across the room. I did not look at it. I already had everything I needed. The message arrived at Sol Command at 3:14 hours station time. Admiral Curran Ness was already awake. She had stopped sleeping more than 4 hours at a stretch about 2 years ago, not from any medical condition, but because there was always something that needed her attention in the hours when most people were not watching. She was sitting at her desk, the System Operations Center, buried 3 levels below the surface of Callisto Base, with a cup of coffee cooling at her elbow and a tactical overlay of the outer frontier filling the wall screen in front of her. She read Yale's message twice. Then she sat the cup down very carefully on the exact center of her desk coaster, the way she always did when she had made a decision and needed her hands to be doing something ordinary while her mind finished the work. Price, she said. Her aide, Lieutenant Owen Hale, looked up from his station across the room. He was young, efficient, and had long since learned that when the Admiral said a name, it was not the beginning of a question, it was the beginning of a sequence. Get me the fleet board, Ness said, full ardent roster in wake. Commander Reyes, tell her I need her in the briefing room in 20 minutes. Yes. Admiral. Ness stood up and walked to the wall screen. She pressed her hand against the lower edge of the overlay and dragged it left, pulling the view from the frontier markers to the space behind Jupiter, a sector that appeared on any standard conclave sensor sweep as empty deep system drift, debris fields, old survey buoys, nothing worth watching. She knew exactly what was there. Building the Ardent fleet had taken 9 years, 4 months, and the kind of sustained national commitment that humanity had not managed since the early days of the International Space Compact. It had required every major Earth government to agree to fund a project they could tell almost no one about, to build ships they could not publicly register, staffed by volunteers who signed agreements that did not officially exist. It had required Curran Ness specifically to spend 9 years of her for managing a secret so large that it had its own dedicated cover program, its own false sensor data, its own paper trail of mundane deep system research that would bore any analyst into moving on. The reason it had worked was simple, and it was the same reason that had driven the entire project from its first planning session. Nobody expected it of humanity. The elder races of the conclave had looked at Earth, young, loud, historically violent, newly admitted to the galactic community, and made a series of assumptions so complete and so confident that they had never thought to question them. Humans were aggressive but disorganized. Humans were clever but impulsive. Humans built warships, yes, but small ones, conventional ones, following the same basic principles of every other species that had stumbled into interstellar travel with a military tradition. None of them had considered what 9 years of focused, disciplined, invisible effort might produce. None of them had asked why humanity had gone so quiet about its defense program in the years following conclave admission. None of them had wondered what a species that had survived its own near-extinction events, that had dragged itself out of resource wars and atmospheric crises through sheer collective stubbornness, might do when it decided that the galaxy needed something done and nobody else was going to do it. Commander Lucia Reyes arrived in the briefing room 17 minutes after Owen Hale's call, her dark hair still slightly damp from the speed of getting ready, a data tablet under her arm, and the particular expression on her face that meant she had already guessed about 40% of what this meeting was going to cover. Reyes commanded the Ardent Fleet's first division, 60 ships, the sharpest of the 340 that currently sat in the dark behind Jupiter, waiting for an order that, until this morning, had still technically been hypothetical. Ness handed her a printed copy of Yell's message. Reyes read it without speaking, then she set it on the briefing table between them and looked up. So it is time, she said. It is time, Ness confirmed. Reyes was quiet, for a moment not surprised. She had Been expecting this conversation in the same low, constant way that you expect a storm when you have been watching the pressure drop for 9 years, just taking a moment to let the reality of it settle into place before she started moving. They have no idea what we have out there, she said. It was not a question. The conclave's last deep system survey of Jupiter space was 4 years ago, Ness said. Our ECM platforms have been running false background returns on their sensors since year 2 of the build. As far as any conclave member knows, that sector contains exactly what it is supposed to contain, and the Veth have never bothered to look at human deep system space at all. Ness paused. That will change, but not before we want it to. Reyes picked up her data tablet and pulled up the Arden fleet roster. 340 vessels organized into 5 divisions, each one built on a design philosophy that the elder races had never developed and would not have recognized as efficient even if they had. Conclave warships were by tradition large, heavily armored, and designed for standoff engagements that could last weeks or months. Wars between elder races were slow, formal affairs, conducted according to conventions so old they had calcified into something close to ritual. You announced your engagement, you maneuvered for position. Over long periods, you exchanged fire at distances that minimized loss on both sides. You negotiated when the cost became too high. Human ships were different. The Arden design principle had a formal name in the project documents: rapid, overwhelming response architecture, but the engineers who built the fleet had always called it something simpler. They called it hit everything at once. The ships were fast, heavily armed, relative to their size, and designed with redundant systems that allowed them to keep fighting through damage that would have ended a conclave engagement. By convention, they carried weapons, calibrated not for standoff distance, but for the kind of close, precise, devastating strikes that ended a battle before the other side could establish its response cycle. And they were linked, all 340 of them, through a combat net system that allowed coordinated strikes across an entire engagement zone simultaneously. No conclave civilization had ever built anything like it, because no conclave civilization had ever needed to. Wars between the elder races were slow enough that coordination happened at a command level, officer to officer, over hours and days. Humanity had built a fleet designed to win in the first 20 minutes. I want 1st Division jump ready in 6 hours, Ness said. Full fleet jump ready in 18. We go in 5 divisions. Staggered approach, 1st Division leading. The targeting package for the Anari system is already loaded. Reyes was already writing rules of engagement. We are going to destroy every Veth expansion node in the Anari system, Ness said. Precision targeting, nothing else. We are not there to take territory. We are there to make a statement that the conclave was not willing to make, and if the Veth respond to the statement. Ness looked at the tactical overlay on the wall screen, the slow red spread of the Veth expansion across Anari space, moving with the patient certainty of something that had never been stopped. Then we respond to their response, she said, and we keep responding until they understand that this is not something they can outlast. She crossed to the wall screen and tapped a sequence that expanded the view outward, past Jupiter, past the solar system across the vast distance to the outer frontier where the Anari system sat waiting. Somewhere in that direction, Yale Doran was sitting in a too large chair in a too large hall, watching the oldest civilizations in the galaxy choose, for the third time in 8 months, to do nothing. I want to talk to the crew before we jump, Ness said. She pulled up the all-fleet communication channel and looked at the camera. Every ship in the Arden fleet would receive this transmission simultaneously on a secure frequency that had been sitting dormant for 9 years, waiting for exactly this moment. She thought briefly about what to say. She thought about the 9 years of work, the volunteers who had signed agreements that did not exist, the engineers who had given their careers to a project they could not discuss, the crew members who had trained for a mission that had always been described as hypothetical, and yet had always felt to everyone involved like an inevitability. She thought about Sella's 2 years of reports, filed correctly through every proper channel, and noted. She thought about Yale's message, 3 words that had been 9 years in the making. Then she activated the channel. This is Admiral Ness, she said. You have all known from the day you signed on that there would be a moment when this stopped being a contingency plan and became a real order. That moment is now. She paused for exactly 2 seconds. The Anari are being absorbed by the vet. The conclave was informed. The conclave chose not to act. We are going to act. Not because anyone told us to, not because we were asked, because it is the right thing to do, and we are the only ones prepared to do it. Another pause. We did not start this. We are going to finish it. Jump prep begins in 6 hours. Ness out. She cut the channel. Owen Hale was standing in the doorway. He had a look on his face that she recognized. The expression of someone who has been working toward a thing for a long time and is only now, in the last moments before it becomes real, registering the full weight of it. Admiral, he said, the conclave is going to see us the moment we leave Jupiter's sensor shadow. Yes, she said. What do you think they will do? Ness picked up her coffee. It was cold. She drank it anyway. At first they will think it is a gesture, she said. They will think we are making a political point, and that we will turn around before we get anywhere near vet space. She set the cup down. Then they will watch us not turn around, and they will have a very uncomfortable few hours of realizing that everything they thought they knew about what humanity was willing to do was wrong. Hale nodded slowly, and the Veth Nest looked at the wall screen at the dark space behind Jupiter, where 340 ships were already beginning their pre-jump sequences. The Veth, she said, are about to meet something they have never encountered in 800 years of expansion. She turned toward the door. An answer. The moment the Arden fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel, every alarm on the bridge activated at once. I was standing near the rear observation rail when the stars snapped back into position around us, and for one breath, the view through the forward screen was exactly what the mission files had shown me in simulation. The soft glow of the Anari star, 3 planets in their familiar orbits, the distant curve of OR7 catching the light like a gray eye. Then the sensor overlay came up, and the beauty of it stopped meaning anything. The Veth had been busy. What I was looking at was not the Anari system as it had appeared in Sella's reports from 2 months ago. The crystalline growth structures that had been advancing 11 km per week had not been advancing 11 km per week. They had been advancing faster than that, much faster, and whoever was filing the updated sensor data to the conclave database had either stopped checking or stopped caring. Structures covered OR7 almost entirely. Now they were spreading across the second planet's upper atmosphere. They had reached the edge of the Onari primary colony station's orbital path. Commander Elena Park, heading tactical operations from the central console, spoke first. Fleet is in formation. All 5 divisions present. Weapons are hot. She paused, reading her secondary screen. I am counting 31 Veth expansion nodes in this system. I had the targeting package built for 17. Update. The package, said Admiral Nest from the command chair. Her voice was exactly the same as it had been in the briefing room on Callisto, not raised, not hurried, just precise. I was there as political liaison, which meant my job in the next few minutes was to observe, document, and be present for whatever communication the Veth chose to initiate. Sella was beside me. Ness had agreed without much discussion that the last Onari diplomat should be on board for this. Sella had said nothing. Since we dropped out of transit, she was standing very still, looking at the sensor overlay showing her home system. Her hands at her sides. The Veth communication came 4 minutes after our arrival. It was not a transmission in any conventional sense. It was a mathematical signal broadcast on the base 12 frequency that Veth observers had been using for contact since their first recorded interaction with another species. I had been briefed on it. I knew the translation. I crossed to the communication station dais and took the interpretation feed directly. The signal resolved into something that, in any human language, would be rendered as a single compressed concept: submit or be absorbed. I walked to Admiral Ness. They sent their standard contact signal. I said, it means surrender or be consumed. They have sent it to every species they have ever encountered. 800 years, 8 contact events, 8 absorptions. Ness looked at me. 8 before today. 8 before today. She held my gaze for 1 second. Then she turned back to the forward screen and said, Commander Park, the targeting package for the 31 nodes, is it ready? Ready, Admiral. Execute. What happened next took 11 minutes. The Ardent fleet did not fire sequentially, ship by ship, the way a conclave engagement would have unfolded. Slow and organized and terrible in its patience, all 340 ships fired simultaneously in a coordinated strike, so precisely timed that the targeting computer's engagement clock showed a variance of less than 300 THS of a second. Across the entire fleet, the Veth expansion nodes did not explode in the dramatic sense. They shattered, each one struck by a precision energy burst, calibrated specifically to the resonance frequency of Veth crystalline structures, a frequency that the project's material scientists had spent 4 years identifying and weaponizing. The nodes did not simply break, they fractured from the inside, the internal geometric patterns collapsing inward, the light going out in each one like a candle being pinched between 2 fingers. 31 nodes, 11 minutes, done. The bridge was silent for a moment after the last confirmation came in. Then Lieutenant Patel at the sensor station said quietly, Admiral, I am reading the conclave deep-range sensor array in this Sector, they are watching this. In real time, I know, Ness said. There are intercepted communication. Signals from at least 6 conclave. Member frequencies, the translation team is processing them now, but the preliminary readout is, Patel stopped. He read the screen again. The preliminary readout across all 6 frequencies is the same phrase, Ness raised an eyebrow slightly, which Patel looked up. This cannot be real. Sela made a sound beside me. It was not a laugh and it was not a cry. It was something between the two, quiet and brief, like a word in a language I did not speak but understood entirely. She pressed one hand flat against the observation rail and breathed carefully. For a moment, I put my hand over hers. I did not say anything. There was nothing that needed saying. The Veth sent a second signal 4 minutes later. It was on a different frequency, broader bandwidth, not the compressed mathematical code of the initial contact. It was an actual communication. Complex, layered, directed specifically at the human fleet. I worked through the translation with 2 other linguists. While the bridge waited, it took about 8 minutes to reconstruct fully what the Veth sent was not a threat and was not a surrender. It was something I had not expected and which told me something important about what was happening inside the Veth collective intelligence. Right now, it was a question rendered as cleanly as our translation tools allowed. The Veth had asked, "What are you?" I brought the translation to Admiral Ness. She read it. She was quiet for a moment, then something moved at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, but the shape of one. What did they send to every other species they absorbed? She asked. The initial signal, I said. Submit or be absorbed, then nothing, because every other species complied. So this is the first time they have ever had to ask a follow-up question. Ness said, "Yes." She looked at the translation again. "What are you?" she repeated softly. Then she handed it back to me. "Do not answer them yet. Let them sit with the question for a while." She stood up from the command chair and walked toward the forward screen, where the Anari system spread out before us, still partly covered in crystal, still showing the damage of 2 years of unchecked expansion, but with 31 fewer growth nodes than it had 20 minutes ago. The difference was already visible on the sensor overlay, like pulling nails from a piece of wood. "Commander Parks," she said, "begin preparation for the secondary strike package. I want the growth structures on Or7's northern hemisphere prioritized, if we can. Interrupt the expansion pattern at the junction points. The outer structures should stop receiving the signal that keeps them cohering." "Understood. Estimated prep time is 40 minutes. Good." Ness turned to me. "What do you need from me, Envoy?" I thought about it. I thought about Sela filing reports for 2 years. I thought about the Conclave's beautiful, ancient, useless procedure. I thought about standing at that podium in that enormous hall under that wrong light and being told that my concerns were noted. "Nothing right now," I said. "You are doing it." Sela spoke for the first time since we had arrived. She did not look away from the sensor overlay of her home system. Her voice was very quiet. "We filed those warnings for 2 years," she said. "Every correct procedure, every proper channel." A pause. Nobody came. I looked at her. "We heard," I said. "It took us longer to get here than I would have liked, but we heard." She turned to look at me then. Her amber eyes were clear, not grateful in a simple way. It was more complicated than gratitude. It was the expression of someone who had spent 2 years in a specific kind of alone and was only now in this moment no longer. In it she nodded once, on the sensor overlay, the 31 dark spaces where the Veth expansion nodes had been were still visible. 31 small absences in a system that had been slowly losing itself for 2 years. They were not enough, not yet. There was a great deal more to do, but they were a beginning, and they were real. And the Veth collective intelligence, 800 years old, 6 civilizations absorbed, utterly certain of its own invulnerability, was sitting in the silence between its own question and our answer, learning something it had never had to learn before. Not every species survives. Some of them come back. The Veth did not sit quietly for long. 11 hours after the first strike, they sent a war formation into the Anari system. 47 crystalline vessels, enormous and slow by human standards, arranged a geometric pattern that the Conclave's historical records described as the Veth Standard Absorption Fleet configuration. It had worked every time they had used it. They had never used it against a species that had prepared specifically to fight it. I was in the tactical briefing room with Admiral Nasson and Commander Park when the formation entered sensor range. The Veth ships were beautiful in the way that things built without consideration for anything except their own function tend to be perfectly symmetrical, refracting the starlight into long colored streaks, moving with a slow, absolute confidence. 47 ships, Park said, average displacement roughly 6 times our largest vessel. Energy signature suggests heavy shielding systems. Standard crystalline coherence arrays. Weapons, Ness asked, long-range coherence beams, same principle as their expansion structures. They grow things onto enemy hulls rather than destroying them. Immobilization rather than elimination. Park paused. Works very well against ships that hold position and fight at range. Ness almost smiled. Good thing we do not fight at range, she said. Get me division commanders on the fleet net, all 5. The next 40 minutes were the most precise and most overwhelming thing I have ever witnessed. I say this as someone who had spent years reading about human military history, about every conflict from the smallest border clash to the wars that had nearly ended civilization on Earth. I had read the accounts. I had studied the doctrine. I had sat in the briefing rooms where Admiral Ness and her officers spoke in calm, technical language about response cycles and engagement windows and simultaneous targeting. None of that reading had prepared me for seeing it happen. Arden Fleet did not wait for the Veth formation to take its positions in every conclave engagement on record. Fleets approached each other, established their formations, and then commenced engagement at a mutually understood distance. It was almost ceremonial, both sides getting into place before anything began. It reflected how elder races had always fought patiently with ritual and procedure, because their wars lasted long enough that the opening minutes barely mattered. Ness sent her ships in before the Vethagray were halfway through their formation, all 5 divisions, 340 vessels, moving at maximum thrust toward 47 Veth ships that were still organizing themselves. Veth coherence beams activated immediately, long beautiful lines of structured energy that would have immobilized a conclave warship inside 3 Seconds of contact, two of our ships took partial hits and began evasive. Patterns that the combat net AI had already calculated the moment the beams powered up. Neither ship went down, both kept firing. The Arden strike doctrine, coordinated, simultaneous, calibrated to the resonance frequencies of Veth structures, took apart 14 of the 47 ships in the first exchange, not damaged, destroyed. The crystalline coherence that held a Veth vessel together was, like the expansion nodes, susceptible to a specific resonance pattern, and our weapons had been built around that pattern from the beginning. The Veth had never shared the frequency weakness with the Conclave because they had never considered that anyone would bother looking for it. Our materials team had spent 4 years looking for it. The remaining 33 ships tried to adjust, spreading their formation, attempting to establish new firing lines, reaching for the longer range configurations that might give them distance from the fleet. Our divisions followed them. The combat net fed updated targeting to every ship in real time, adjusting to each Veth movement before it completed. The Veth ships, built for a kind of war that took place over days and weeks, could not adapt quickly enough to an enemy that was updating its response every 6 seconds. In 43 minutes, the Veth formation ceased to exist. I sat in the briefing room while the final confirmation reports came in, and I tried to find the right words in my head for what I had just watched. What I kept coming back to was not the scale of it or the speed or the precision, though all of those were remarkable. What I kept coming back to was the specific look on Alina Park's face as she read the last confirmation. Not triumph, not relief, but the particular focused calm of someone who has been working toward a specific result for a long time and has finally produced it. They knew they would win. They had built the fleet to win. What I was watching was not surprise. It was a plan completing itself. The Conclave was watching. I knew this because Owen Hale brought me an intercepted communication packet halfway through the engagement, not from our intelligence systems, but from the Conclave's own public relay network, which the Veth battle had apparently pushed into unencrypted emergency frequency. 6 different Conclave members were transmitting simultaneously to each other, and in 2 cases directly to the Ardent Fleet's registered communication channel. The transmissions to us were formal demands to cease engagement immediately, citing 5 separate Conclave statutes on unprovoked escalation. I read them twice. Then I wrote a response on behalf of the Earth Diplomatic Corps, composed it in the correct formal register, and sent it on every open conclave frequency. It said, "You were provided with documented evidence of Veth territorial incursion and absorption activity on 3 separate occasions. Over 8 months, all 3 submissions were either tabled or noted without action. The Anari system has been under active absorption for over 2 years. Earth has acted where the Conclave chose not to. We are open to discussing the parameters of this action once the immediate threat to the Anari system has been neutralized. Until that time, we respectfully declined to stop." I sent. It sat back and waited to see which direction the Conclave's response would blow. The weeks that followed were the most exhausting of my life, and the most clarifying. The Veth sent 3 more formations into Anari space over the next 12 weeks. Each one was larger than the last, as though they were discovering for the first time the concept of escalation, of the fact that an enemy might hit back harder than expected and require a greater commitment of force. It was disorienting to watch. In a way, the Veth had absorbed 6 civilizations over 800 years. They had developed every strategy for overwhelming, surrounding, outlasting a defending species, but they had never developed a strategy for responding to an opponent who kept coming at them faster than they could regroup, because no opponent had ever done that before. We lost 34 ships over those 12 weeks. I will not reduce that number to a statistic. 34 ships meant something between 800 and 1,200 people, depending on the vessel class, and every name went into the official record and was read aloud at a memorial that Ness held on the fleetnet every Sunday, which she never skipped regardless of what else was happening. She read every name herself. She said once when I asked her about it that she had known this was the price and had made the choice anyway, and the least she could do was make sure the price was never abstract. We kept moving. The Veth in the 8th week sent a formal negotiation request. It came through a channel they had apparently set up specifically to communicate with human vessels. A new frequency, a new protocol, which was itself remarkable because it meant they had built something new in response to us. They had adapted their communication systems. What they had not adapted yet was their fundamental assumption. The offer they sent was gracious by Veth standards. They would cease expansion in the Anari system. They would acknowledge a human-defined boundary in the outer frontier. They would agree to formal diplomatic contact with Earth's government. In exchange, the Ardent Fleet would withdraw from Veth space immediately. There was one other element to the offer, buried in the 4th layer of the message, stated almost as an afterthought, was the additional condition. Earth would acknowledge the 6 previously absorbed civilizations as legitimately integrated into the Veth collective. I brought the full translation to Admiral Ness. She read it carefully all the way through. Then she set it down. They want us to agree that what they did to those 6 civilizations was acceptable. She said that is the functional meaning of the condition. Yes, Ness was quiet for a moment. In the 9 months I had known her, I had learned that her silences were not empty. They were the sound of a very precise mind working through something completely. Before speaking, the 6 absorbed species, she said, what do we know about them? From the conclave's historical records, they ranged in size from small colony civilizations to mid-scale interstellar societies. The largest had a population of about 4 billion at the time of absorption. They are listed in the conclave database as extinct. I paused. The records were filed by the Veth. Ness looked at me. Of course they were, she said. There is also the question of the Anari, I said. The offer does not include any provision for restoration of Anari space. It only commits to ceasing further expansion. What has already been absorbed they intend to keep. Ness picked up the message and folded it once and set it back down. Draft a response, she said. Tell them that Earth declines the offer. Tell them we are prepared to discuss genuine settlement when they have demonstrated a full withdrawal from all Anari territory, including currently held structures. Tell them that the condition regarding the 6 absorbed species is not a starting point for negotiation. It is a disqualifying condition. I nodded. I had expected this answer, which was not the same as being relieved by it. Declining the offer meant the war continued. The war continuing meant more losses, more names. Read aloud on Sundays. I will draft it. I said Yale. Ness used my first name, which she almost never did in a professional context. I looked at her. You agree with this? I thought about Sella's amber eyes. I thought about 2 years of correctly filed reports and the word noted. I thought about 6 civilizations that existed now only records written by the thing that had consumed them. Yes, I said completely. The response went out that afternoon. 3 days later, our deep intelligence team located the Veth Hive core. It was not, as the conclave's extremely limited records on the Veth had suggested, a single fixed location. The Hive core was a distributed intelligence system, a network of primary coherence nodes, spread across 7 locations in Veth central space, linked by quantum entangled crystal lattices that maintained the coherence of the collective consciousness across interstellar distances. Destroying any one node would damage the network. Destroying all 7 simultaneously within a window of less than 4 seconds would collapse the entire structure. The mathematical model suggested it would be like pulling every knot out of a net at the same time. For 4 seconds, you would need resonance pulses from 7 positions simultaneously. For that, you needed the entire ardent fleet divided into 7 strike groups jumping to 7 positions in Veth central space at exactly the same moment. Planning took 11 days. The risk was enormous, moving the entire fleet deep into Veth territory to 7 separate positions, with no ability to support each other if any group came under attack before the strike completed. Every ship commander was briefed individually. Every one of them accepted the assignment without hesitation, which was the kind of thing that, if you stopped to think about it too long, became very hard to hold in your chest without feeling the full weight of it. On a Tuesday morning, station time, Admiral Mass gave the order. The Arden fleet jumped. All 7 strike groups arrived within a 4-second window of each other. The Veth Hive core network had no time to reconfigure or protect itself. By the time the sensors of the outermost node registered the presence of human ships, the resonance pulse from its own strike group was already in the air. 7 nodes, 7 pulses, 4-second total elapsed. The Veth collective intelligence went quiet. Not dead. The individual crystalline organisms that made up Veth society were not destroyed, but the coherence that connected them, the collective mind that had existed for 800 years and had absorbed 6 civilizations with patient certainty, ceased to function like a network with all its servers with pulled at once. The individual nodes remained, but they had nothing to connect to. The intelligence that had directed the expansion filed the absorption records, sent the absorption fleets, asked, "What are you in the dark of the armory system?" That intelligence as a coherent thing simply stopped on the bridge of the lead ship. In the silence after the confirmation reports came in, nobody spoke for a long time. Sela was there. She had been there every day of the 12-week campaign, quietly in the same spot near the observation rail, watching the work get done. In the silence, she turned to look at me. I had no words for what had just happened. I do not think any words would have covered it, so I just looked back at her and she looked at me. And between us was everything that, too Years of ignored warnings and 12 weeks of hard, costly action had finally produced. Then someone on the bridge started laughing, not from cruelty but from the release of 12 weeks of relentless forward motion finally being allowed to stop. Someone else across the room quietly put their head down on their arms. Someone near the navigation console stood up and walked to the viewport and just looked at the stars. For a while, Ness sat very still in the command chair. She was looking at the sensor overlay showing 7 dark spaces where the Veth network had been. After a while, she said very quietly, "To no one in particular, read me the names." Owen Hale understood immediately. He pulled up the memorial list without being asked, and he read every name in alphabetical order of every person the Ardent Fleet had lost in 12 weeks of fighting a war that the rest of the galaxy had decided not to fight. The bridge was silent except for his voice. All 306 remaining ships in the Ardent Fleet were on the FleetNet, and every one of them heard it. 6 months after the Veth Hive core fell silent, I walked back into the assembly hall on Kareth Station. The ceiling was the same 40 m of dark humming stone. Lights were the same frequency that made the edges of everything look slightly wrong. The seats still built for bodies twice my size. None of that had changed. What had changed was where I was walking. I was not walking to the envoy's podium on the outer edge of the floor, the low, small podium at the far end of the room where visiting junior delegates stood when they were permitted to address the assembly. I was walking to the speaker's dais at the center of the floor, the raised platform reserved by conclave protocol that stretched back 11,000 years for representatives of what the conclave formally designated as Tier 1 strategic powers. There had been 7 Tier 1 powers in conclave history. The last one had been designated 400 years ago. Earth was the 8th. Earth was also the first to achieve the designation through unilateral action against an elder race threat. Every other Tier 1 designation in conclave history had been earned through centuries of accumulated political influence and economic weight. Ours had been earned in 12 weeks in a war that the conclave had refused to sanction and could not have stopped. The hall was full. Every conclave member had sent its senior delegation. There were more beings in this room than I had ever seen. In the assembly floor, some of them standing along the walls because their delegations had expanded beyond their usual seating allocation, as though everyone wanted to have as many representatives present as possible to see with as many eyes as they had. They watched me walk to the speaker's dais. I had spent a great deal of time in the past 6 months studying the faces, or the analogs of faces, of the conclave's elder races. I had learned to read the Droth's fabric layer movements. I had learned what the Mahan's neck breathing rhythms indicated about their internal state. I had spent enough time around the chorus collectives linked form to recognize when they were in active internal debate. What I saw in the room as I walked to the dais was something I had not seen in 3 years of attending this assembly. I had seen contempt, polite, enormous, crushing contempt, the kind that does not even bother to be hostile because it is too complete to need hostility. I had seen indifference, which was in some ways worse. I had seen the particular attention that powerful beings give to something they consider minor problem they will eventually deal With I had never seen this, what I saw was watchfulness, not weariness exactly. Though there was some of that, not fear. Though there was some of that too. Underneath, what I mostly saw was the expression of beings who had made a significant error in their understanding of something and were now in the process of updating that understanding, carefully with the specific concentration of very old minds that do not update easily and know it. They were looking at me the way you look at something you misjudged. I stepped onto the speaker's dais and looked out at the room. The conclave's chief protocol officer, a human administrator, named something that took 4 breath cycles to pronounce correctly, whom I had always addressed as administrator. Vel announced my title and designation. In the standard form, the speaker for the United Earth Government, Tier 1. Strategic power recognized by the Galactic Conclave in the 42nd year of Earth's membership. Then the room was quiet and it was my turn to speak. I had written and rewritten this address 11 times in 6 months. The first version was angry. It said everything I had wanted to say from the podium 3 years ago, with none of the careful diplomatic containment. I had thrown it away after 2 days, not because anger was wrong, but because anger was not what this moment needed. This moment needed something colder and more lasting than anger. It needed clarity. I spoke for 14 minutes. I did not use notes. I had learned the words well enough that they were mine. Now, not a draft. I told the assembly what the Veth had done and what the conclave's response to it had been. I used specific dates, specific filing numbers, specific session records. I named every member civilization that had voted to table or ignore the Anari warnings. I stated plainly that Earth had acted because the conclave had failed to act, and that we had done so at a cost that the conclave was going to formally acknowledge. I told them about the 34 ships. I told them the number of people. I did not describe the battles. I described only the memorial and Admiral Ness reading the names every Sunday without exception. I told them that Earth was not interested in punishment or political leverage. We were not going to demand seat changes or procedural reforms or the kind of performative accountability that fills a session record without changing anything real. What we were going to do was simpler. We were going to remain in this room at the speaker's dais as a Tier 1 power, and we were going to use that position to make it structurally impossible for what had happened to the Anari to happen again. This body has existed for 11,000 years, I said. In that time, 6 civilizations were absorbed by a single expanding intelligence, and this body's response on every occasion was to note their concerns. I am not here to replace your procedures. I am here because the galaxy has seen what happens when the procedures are used as a reason to do nothing, and it cannot unsee that. Neither can we. I paused. The Anari filed their first warning in 2245. I filed my first petition to this assembly in 2247. The first Ardent Fleet vessel departed Sol system in 2247. We were listening when nobody else was, because we had already decided that listening was not enough, that at some point when the warnings are real and the evidence is clear and the procedures have been exhausted, the only meaningful response is action. Another pause. That is what Earth did. That is what Earth will continue to do. We welcome discussion. We welcome partnership. We welcome every member of this body who is willing to build something that actually works. I looked across the room slowly, letting it be deliberate. We are no longer asking permission. I stepped it back from the ice. The room was very quiet. Then from the Drazy delegation, the same cluster of dark fabric beings whose senior delegate had turned away from my petition 3 years ago with a dismissive translation click came, a sound that the translation system rendered as the formal gesture of acknowledgement. Considered real. Others followed, not all of them, not the men. Not yet. They were still deciding. You could see it in their neck rhythms, not the chorus collective who were deep in internal debate, but enough of the room that the silence had changed its quality. After the session closed, I found Sella waiting near the outer corridor. She had watched from the visitor gallery. She was not yet seated in a full delegation position, though that process was underway, because restoring the honorary diplomatic standing was one of the first things the new joint working group had committed to. She was wearing her formal robes, the deep blue ones that I had only seen her wear twice before, and she looked for the first time since I had known her like someone who was standing in the present rather than carrying the weight of the past 2 years like a stone she could not put down. You said you could not tell me more than something will happen, she said. I could not. I said, not then, but you knew. I knew that Admiral Ness was not the kind of person to build 340 ships and leave them parked behind Jupiter. I said, and I knew that she had been waiting for my message for a very long time. Sella was quiet for a moment. The corridor around us was busy. Delegates and aides and administrators moving in every direction, the quiet machinery of conclave diplomacy continuing its ancient work. What happens to my world? She asked. What happens to OR7? The restoration project begins next month, I said. Funding confirmed from 12 member states. Death crystalline structures without the hive core to maintain their coherent signal are already beginning to dissolve. The process will take about 3 years. OR7 should be habitable again within 5. She breathed in slowly. 5 years, she said. I know it is a long time. It is the shortest possible time, she said. 2 months ago, we did not know if it would happen at all. I did not have an answer for that. Because she was right, she extended her hand in the human gesture she had adopted over 2 years of working beside Earth's diplomatic mission. I shook it. Her grip was firm and brief, and she held eye contact for the full length of it, which I had come to understand was the honorary form of the gesture. The hand was for the other person's culture. The gaze was for hers. Thank you, envoy, she said. Yao, I told her, we had been through enough that my title felt wrong between us. She smiled briefly and then turned and walked back toward the visitor gallery exit, and I watched her go. Later that evening, I sat alone in the human delegation's chamber, our new chamber, the large one, the one that conclave protocol now required to be the most prominent on the station, because that was what the designation meant. It was still strange to sit in a room this size and know it was ours. I expected at some point the strangeness would pass. I opened a new file on my slate. There were other things I had been watching. Not the Veth, they were not gone exactly, but the collective intelligence that had driven the expansion was gone, and what remained was fragmentary and disorganized and would be our analysts, believed incapable of coordinated action for a long time. No, the things I had been watching were elsewhere in the galaxy. Small signals, quiet patterns, the kind of early data that looks like nothing until you know what nothing looks like right before it becomes something. I had been watching them for 8 months. I had flagged them in my personal files 3 times. I had not yet brought them to the conclave because the evidence was not yet at the level where I could formally submit it. I remembered what that had felt like last time. I remembered sitting in a too large room making formally correct submissions and being told politely that my concerns were noted. This time, when the evidence was ready, I would not be standing at the outer podium. I would be standing at the speaker's dais with the full designation of a Tier 1 power behind every word, and the ardent fleet, what remained of it and what we were already quietly rebuilding, waiting. The dark behind Jupiter. I began writing. The warning this time would be different because this time the galaxy had learned at significant cost, in the most direct way possible, that when humanity files a warning, the correct response is not to note it. The correct response is to listen.